Imagine for a moment that everything you think you know about life, death, and the world around you is only a fraction of a much larger picture. We move through our lives believing that time flows in a straight line, that birth is the beginning and death the end, that what lies beyond is inaccessible until the final breath. But what if that linearity, that clear division between life and afterlife, is an illusion? What if the boundaries we place between here and beyond, between living and dead, are artificial, designed to make sense of something far more complex and mysterious? For thousands of years, humans have pondered the nature of existence, asking not only what comes after death, but whether the very distinction between life and afterlife even exists. Some philosophical traditions, mystical teachings, and even modern scientific theories hint at the possibility that the afterlife might not be a distant, separate realm, but something already intertwined with our consciousness, present in the subtle layers of our current existence. Human beings are built out of the past in the most literal way possible. Every cell in your body carries instructions written long before you were born. Those instructions were shaped by countless lives, by people who survived long enough to pass something forward. We tend to think of this as biology only, as chemistry and DNA doing its quiet work without intention. But intention is a slippery thing. Even in modern neuroscience, we don't fully understand where it begins or ends. We know that memory isn't stored in one place, that decision-making emerges from layers of processes, many of them unconscious. So when you feel an urge you can't explain, a fear with no obvious source, or a pull towards something you've never encountered before, it's fair to ask where that signal originated. There is a field of study called epigenetics, which shows that experiences can alter the way genes express themselves, sometimes across generations. Trauma, famine, prolonged stress, these don't just end when the individual dies. They can leave chemical markers that influence how descendants respond to the world. A person may feel anxious in situations that are objectively safe, or hypervigilant without knowing why. On one level, this is adaptive biology. On another, it resembles inheritance of experience itself. Not a memory you can recall, but a memory your body seems to recognize. Now imagine consciousness not as a light that switches off at death, but as a process that gradually diffuses. We already know consciousness isn't neatly contained. Your thoughts are influenced by language you didn't invent, ideas you absorbed from others, cultural patterns shaped by people long gone. In that sense, your mind is already a shared space. The dead speak through words they left behind, through traditions, through habits so normalized they feel invisible. But what if this influence isn't only symbolic? Some philosophers propose that consciousness may be more like a field than a possession. Instead of something you have, it's something you participate in. Individual awareness could be a localized pattern, like a wave forming in the ocean. When the wave collapses, the water doesn't vanish. It returns to the larger system, carrying information about what it encountered. If this is even partially true, then the boundary between the living and the dead becomes less absolute. Those who lived before may no longer experience reality as individuals, but their awareness may still exert subtle pressure on the present. This idea appears in different forms across cultures. Many indigenous traditions speak of ancestors not as distant figures, but as active participants in daily life. Guidance comes through dreams, intuition, sudden clarity. These experiences are often dismissed as superstition, yet modern psychology acknowledges that the unconscious mind can integrate vast amounts of information and present it as insight. The disagreement is not about whether guidance occurs, but about where it comes from. Consider how often people report feeling watched over in moments of danger, or sensing approval or disappointment without an external source. Even those who reject spiritual explanations describe a sense of being accompanied by something older than themselves. This feeling may be interpreted as internalized parental voices or social conditioning. But conditioning itself is a kind of survival mechanism passed down through generations. The voice telling you not to step into the dark forest, not to trust the quiet stranger, may be echoing decisions that once meant life or death. There is also the phenomenon of sudden familiarity. You visit a place for the first time and feel as though you've been there before. You meet someone and trust them instantly, or feel unease without evidence. These reactions are usually explained as pattern recognition, the brain matching fragments of experience. But pattern recognition requires stored patterns. Some of those patterns may not originate in your own life. Memory itself is less stable than we assume. Each time you recall something, it changes slightly. Over time, memories blend, distort, and incorporate external information. If individual memory is this fluid, then collective memory may be even more so. Families pass down stories that evolve with each telling. Eventually, no one remembers who experienced what. The story becomes a shared mental structure rather than a personal account. In that structure, the boundary between one mind and another erodes. Now imagine that consciousness behaves similarly. Instead of being erased, it becomes distributed. Fragments of intention, emotion, and awareness disperse into the networks that once supported them. Family lines, social groups, even geographic regions could act as reservoirs of these fragments. This would mean that when you make a decision, you are not doing so alone. You are negotiating with layers of inherited awareness, some of it benevolent, some of it fearful, all of it invested in survival. This perspective reframes the idea of guidance. Guidance doesn't have to be deliberate instruction from a distinct entity. It can be pressure, probability, subtle bias, a nudge rather than a command. The ancestors don't need to speak in words. They influence through tendencies, through the things that feel natural, obvious, or inevitable. There is an unsettling implication here. If influence persists, so does unfinished business. Regrets, unresolved conflicts, and unfulfilled intentions may not vanish. They may express themselves indirectly, shaping descendants' lives in ways that feel personal but originate elsewhere. A person may feel compelled to pursue a certain profession, to live in a particular place, or to repeat a relationship pattern without knowing why. From this view, some lives are continuations rather than beginnings. Science doesn't currently support the idea of conscious guidance in a literal sense, but it does support the idea that complex systems carry history within them. The human brain is a complex system layered atop biological, cultural, and evolutionary history. When it generates thoughts and feelings, it draws from all of that material. Whether we call that material ancestors or data is partly a matter of language. Language matters because it shapes how we interpret experience. When someone feels guided and calls it intuition, the experience is validated. When they call it imagination, it is dismissed. Yet the underlying phenomenon may be the same. A synthesis of inherited information producing a response that feels meaningful. There is also the question of dreams. Dreams often feature people we've never met, landscapes we don't recognize, emotions that don't fit our waking lives. Some researchers believe dreams allow the brain to simulate scenarios using abstracted information. Others suggest dreams are a way of integrating memory across time. If that integration extends beyond a single lifetime, then dreams could be one of the places where inherited awareness becomes visible. Even if you reject the idea of literal ancestor consciousness, the metaphor remains powerful. You are never acting in isolation. Your values, fears, and instincts are shaped by those who came before. In a sense, they live through you. And if consciousness is not strictly confined to individual brains, then this living through may be more than metaphor. The question then shifts. If influence persists, can it be engaged with deliberately? Cultures that honor ancestors often do so through ritual, storytelling, and remembrance. These practices strengthen identity and continuity. From a psychological perspective, they help individuals contextualize their struggles within a larger narrative. From another perspective, they may tune attention towards subtle internal signals that are usually ignored. Modern life encourages the opposite. We are trained to see ourselves as isolated units, self-made and self-directed. This belief creates freedom, but also loneliness. If guidance exists and we deny it, we may feel unmoored. If it doesn't exist and we imagine it does, we may feel comforted. Either way, the experience has real effects. What makes this idea difficult is that it refuses to stay in one category. It's not purely spiritual, not purely scientific. It lives in the overlap, where evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. That overlap is uncomfortable because it demands humility. It asks us to admit how little we understand about awareness itself. Consider this final thought as we continue forward. Every generation believes it is more advanced, more rational, more awake than the ones before. And yet, each generation is shaped by forces it barely notices. If those forces include not just history, but lingering awareness, then the present moment is more crowded than it appears. And not haunted exactly, just inhabited by echoes that never fully faded. If we accept even a small possibility that some aspect of our ancestors' awareness persists, it changes how we understand identity. We tend to think of ourselves as singular, bounded individuals, but this may be an illusion of perspective. Each decision we make, each emotional reaction, is filtered through layers of inherited experience. These layers are not just genetic, they are social, cultural, and possibly conscious in ways we don't yet grasp. Imagine sitting in a room full of quiet observers whose voices you cannot hear, but whose presence subtly shifts how you move, what you say, and how you feel. That is what living with ancestral consciousness might feel like, a constant negotiation between visible choice and invisible influence. Our fascination with ancestry is ancient. Across the world, humans have created elaborate systems to honor those who came before. Graves, altars, portraits, and stories are not merely ceremonial. They may serve as points of interaction with something larger than ourselves. In some traditions, these acts are thought to summon guidance or protection. In psychological terms, they reinforce memory and attention. In either case, there is a clear recognition. The past continues to exist in a way that affects the present. If consciousness itself can persist like a pattern or a field, these rituals may act as conduits, amplifying influence or tuning perception to subtle currents we normally ignore. The concept of ancestral guidance often seems mystical, but it can be framed in scientific terms. We know humans are highly sensitive to social cues. We unconsciously adopt behaviors from those around us, even strangers, without realizing it. Extend this over time, across generations, and the behaviors of ancestors could continue to ripple forward, shaping our instincts, fears, and habits. In this sense, intuition might be ancestral memory masquerading as personal insight. You hesitate before speaking, feel wary in a new environment, or trust someone instinctively. Not just because of your personal experiences, but because echoes of others' experiences are embedded in your nervous system. Some of the most fascinating examples come from studies on intergenerational trauma. Children and grandchildren of people who endured extreme events, famine, war, forced migration, often display heightened vigilance, anxiety, or resilience, even if they have no direct memory of those events. The information seems to travel through mechanisms we are only beginning to understand. It is tempting, then, to imagine a spectrum. At one end, genetic and epigenetic inheritance. At the other, the subtle transmission of awareness. Between them, a grey area where consciousness, memory, and experience may persist in ways that science struggles to measure. Another angle is the uncanny familiarity humans often encounter. Déjà vu, sudden insights, or inexplicable emotional responses can feel like a whisper from something outside oneself. Neuroscience often interprets these as internal glitches or the brain processing information unconsciously. Yet if ancestral awareness persists, these moments could be interpreted differently, as fragments of other minds still observing, nudging, or warning. They are not dramatic interventions, but gentle currents, like wind moving a sail you didn't realize you were holding. Dreams are a particularly compelling arena for this idea. Dream imagery frequently combines the unfamiliar with the deeply resonant. We may dream of faces we've never seen, places that seem historically distant, or events that echo family history in symbolic form. Modern dream research shows that dreams consolidate memory, process emotions, and solve problems. If consciousness extends beyond the individual, dreams may be an interface between personal awareness and inherited patterns of thought or feeling. Dreams could be the space where ancestral influence becomes perceptible, not as distinct voices, but as meaningful signals embedded within the flow of experience. Patterns of behavior also hint at guidance from the past. Family dynamics, cultural expectations, and inherited habits often repeat across generations. People fall into career paths, relationship patterns, or creative pursuits that mirror ancestors' lives, sometimes with eerie precision. Psychologists attribute this to environment, modeling, and genetic predisposition. But the persistence of patterns raises a question. Is this purely biological and social, or could some fragment of consciousness itself be steering the course? If consciousness can persist beyond death as a kind of field or resonance, then ancestral guidance might be woven into the very fabric of our decision-making, making life both freer and more constrained than we realize. It is tempting to resist this idea because it implies that our choices are not entirely our own. Yet recognizing influence is not the same as surrendering autonomy. Even if ancestral consciousness exists, awareness of it adds a layer of agency. A person who senses the subtle pull of inherited patterns can reflect, question, and alter their path. The guidance may be a gentle bias, not command, and knowing it exists allows for conscious negotiation. This turns life into a dialogue rather than a monologue, a conversation across generations. Some researchers have begun exploring analogous ideas in artificial systems. Networks of artificial neurons, for example, can retain patterns long after their creators are gone, influencing outcomes in ways the programmers did not intend. These systems demonstrate that information persistence is possible without ongoing awareness in the traditional sense. If complex systems can retain influence in this way, human consciousness, more subtle, interconnected, and historically embedded, might operate under similar principles. Influence without an identifiable agent, yet structured and directional enough to feel like guidance. Even in daily life, the traces of the past are evident. Our languages, our customs, the architecture of our cities, all encode the decisions and preferences of those who lived long before. When we navigate them, we do so guided by invisible hands. The act of living becomes an ongoing negotiation with history. But what if these invisible hands are more than metaphorical? What if they carry vestiges of awareness, fragments of intention, or subtle memories of experience? Then history is not just background. It is a living presence, shaping choices and perceptions in ways we rarely acknowledge. Intuition, habit, and instinct are central to this exploration. They often feel private, immediate, and self-contained, yet they emerge from processes that span generations. For instance, the human startle reflex, the ability to detect danger, and the subtle calibration of social behavior are informed not only by personal experience, but by evolutionary history. Extend this framework one step further, and some of these calibrations might carry traces of conscious response, encoded not in genes alone, but in the persistent echo of awareness. Decisions may feel spontaneous, but they could be guided by ancestral patterns we are only beginning to sense. Even morality may have roots in this layered consciousness. Humans tend to internalize codes of conduct, virtues, and taboos from their predecessors. Some psychologists explain this through socialization and cultural reinforcement. Yet these rules often persist long after their practical purpose has faded. If awareness can endure in a subtle, distributed form, morality might reflect not just social contracts, but ongoing conversation with the values and judgments of those who came before. Ethical impulses could, in part, be ancestral commentary, echoes of experience advising the living, not through words, but through the shapes of feeling. In many ways, this idea reframes what it means to know oneself. Identity is not just the sum of experiences we directly recall, it is the intersection of inherited patterns, environmental inputs, cultural narratives, and possibly the lingering awareness of those who came before. The self becomes porous, a vessel through which past consciousness occasionally flows, nudging, warning, or supporting. Even memories we consider our own may be informed by frameworks established long before we existed. This perspective also invites a shift in how we relate to others. If consciousness can persist in subtle ways, then family, community, and even strangers are not just present in the moment. They are participants in a network that extends backward in time. Every interaction is layered, shaped by visible choices and invisible history. Empathy, therefore, may include not only the other person's experience, but the reverberations of generations of experience embedded within them. Relationships are amplified, enriched, and complicated by the weight of this unseen history. Finally, this framework challenges conventional ideas of death. If consciousness does not vanish abruptly but dissipates gradually, influencing subsequent generations, death becomes less of an endpoint and more of a transition. Awareness may shift from individual expression to distributed effect, persisting in subtle ways that interact with the living. Life is, in this view, a continuum, a dialogue across generations rather than a solitary line. Guidance is quiet, pervasive, and often unnoticed, yet it shapes everything from instinct to ambition, from intuition to moral sense. The thought lingers. Even as you make decisions that feel entirely your own, you are participating in a conversation that began long before you, a conversation that may never fully end. We all have moments where we just know something is right or wrong, moments when a decision crystallizes without conscious deliberation. Psychology often attributes this to subconscious pattern recognition, accumulated experience, or cognitive shortcuts. Yet when we consider the possibility of ancestral influence, intuition gains another layer of meaning. What if some of the subtle signals we interpret as instinct are actually echoes of lived experience from generations past? What if the clarity that arrives unbidden is not solely our own, but filtered through the accumulated consciousness of those who once walked paths we now follow? This perspective reframes risk and reward in human behavior. Consider how people sometimes inherit talents, inclinations, or fears they cannot explain. Musical ability, artistic sensibility, an aptitude for numbers, or a pronounced fear of water or heights may emerge seemingly from nowhere. Conventional explanations include genetics, upbringing, and environment. But if we entertain the idea that consciousness can persist, these inherited tendencies may not only be physical or social, they could be cognitive imprints, small fragments of awareness that persist across generations. Skills, preferences, and tendencies become not merely traits, but ongoing conversations between past and present, a silent guidance system rooted in human history. Time, in this context, begins to feel less linear. We often imagine lives as discrete, separated by birth and death. Yet inherited awareness suggests that time is layered. The living, the dead, and the echoes of their consciousness overlap. The present is influenced by the past not only through memory or culture, but potentially through residual awareness that shapes perception, choice, and emotion. Your hesitation before a difficult conversation, your inexplicable attraction to a place, or even the sudden insight that solves a problem might be subtle negotiations with consciousness that preceded you by decades or centuries. In this sense, the moment is never entirely singular. it carries history folded into it. One of the more compelling phenomena supporting this idea is the inheritance of emotional memory. Research shows that trauma, stress, and even learned behaviors can affect descendants' physiology and responses. Rats exposed to frightening odors, for example, produce offspring who display heightened sensitivity to the same scents. Humans, too, demonstrate anxiety, resilience, or wariness linked to experiences their ancestors endured. These are tangible, measurable effects, but they also hint at a more abstract question. Could consciousness itself leave traces beyond chemical and neural changes, influencing perception in subtle ways? If awareness can imprint itself, even indirectly, then our nervous systems may be repositories for more than just DNA. They may be carriers of lived experience, including fragments of awareness that we feel as intuition or instinct. The notion of distributed consciousness challenges the boundaries of individuality. If we carry echoes of those who came before, then our thoughts are not exclusively our own. They emerge in dialogue with multiple layers of history. We might experience internal conflict, sudden clarity, or a sense of guidance as our own mental processes interact with residual awareness embedded in our cognition. The self, in this framework, becomes a dynamic interface rather than a fixed entity. We are nodes in a network that spans time, participating in patterns of thought that began long before our birth. Dreams offer a particularly rich space for exploring this interface. They combine memory, emotion, imagination, and often fragments of social and cultural knowledge. When ancestral awareness is considered, dreams might be a window where these influences converge, blending personal experience with inherited patterns of thought or feeling. A dream about a distant relative, a long-gone environment, or an unfamiliar challenge may feel personal yet resonate with echoes from the past. The imagery might carry messages or guidance not in language, but in structure, mood, and symbolism. Dreams, then, could be less about escape from reality and more about interaction with extended consciousness across generations. Ancestral influence might also manifest through synchronicity, the uncanny alignment of events, people, or opportunities. Many cultures interpret these moments as signs or guidance, attributing meaning to coincidence. Skeptics call it chance, pattern recognition, or cognitive bias. But consider that if consciousness can persist, these alignments may be subtle interactions between distributed awareness and present circumstances. Life becomes a conversation with layers of history, where meaning emerges from resonance rather than strict causation. The seemingly improbable feels purposeful, as though unseen hands have nudged events to converge in ways that reflect both past intention and present possibility. Behavioral patterns provide another lens. Families often repeat cycles of choice, success, failure, and conflict. Children may unconsciously mirror parents' fears or ambitions, sometimes without ever having observed the specific behavior that drives it. Cultural norms, too, propagate over generations, shaping morality, social expectations, and aesthetic preferences. These inherited patterns often feel natural, obvious, or inevitable. If consciousness persists beyond individual death, these patterns might not be purely social or genetic. They could be the echo of decision-making and awareness, ongoing in subtle ways that guide descendants along familiar paths. Ethics and morality take on new depth when viewed through this lens. Many of our values, norms, and intuitions about right and wrong are transmitted through family, community, and culture. From a conventional standpoint, this is social conditioning. Yet if awareness endures, moral intuition may carry a further dimension, the weight of experience from previous generations. The caution against harming others, the drive to help, or even the instinctive understanding of fairness could partially originate from the collective guidance of those who came before, influencing behavior through a form of inherited consciousness. Moral reasoning may be a dialogue across generations rather than a purely personal calculation. This perspective reframes the idea of knowledge itself. Learning is not simply the acquisition of information, it is participation in a network of experience. When a skill is taught, a story told, or a ritual performed, the learner does not absorb isolated facts. They engage with patterns that have persisted over time. If consciousness can persist in some form, this learning is not just cognitive, but interactive with residual awareness. The act of learning becomes a quiet acknowledgement of presence, an engagement with minds that exist beyond immediate perception, yet leave an imprint on thought and action. The concept also reframes our understanding of memory. Personal memory is malleable, constantly reconstructed, and influenced by context, suggestion, and social interaction. Collective memory, cultural memory, and familial memory operate on similar principles, often blending historical fact with interpretation. If consciousness can persist, then memory may act as a medium for guidance, embedding fragments of awareness that influence perception without explicit recognition. In essence, remembering could be more than recall. It could be a form of communication, a channel through which past awareness informs the present. Even seemingly mundane choices may carry this influence. Where to live, whom to trust, what career to pursue, how to respond in conflict. These decisions are often framed as personal preference. Yet, when layered with inherited patterns of awareness, they are also echoes of strategy, survival, and intention from generations past. Life itself becomes a complex negotiation, a dance between conscious volition and ancestral resonance, where guidance is subtle, indirect, and often unrecognized. Every instinct, every gut feeling, may be more than intuition. It may be a conversation stretching backward through time. If we allow that some aspect of consciousness may persist beyond individual death, it invites a reconsideration of memory, both personal and collective. Memory is never static. It is reconstructed each time we access it, influenced by emotion, context, and perception. Collective memory, what families, communities, and cultures retain, operates similarly, evolving with each retelling. Stories of ancestors, family legends, and cultural myths often blend fact and interpretation, yet their influence is undeniable. If consciousness endures in subtle ways, these memories may function as more than symbolic reminders. They may act as channels, carrying fragments of awareness, shaping decisions, and subtly guiding behavior across generations. Consider how humans respond to environment. Certain landscapes, objects, or sounds can evoke profound emotional reactions that seem disconnected from personal experience. A person may feel unease in a forest, or in a mountain pass, or inexplicable connection to a river or coastline. While these responses are often attributed to evolutionary programming or learned experience, they could also reflect a deeper transmission of awareness. Environments hold the imprint of countless lives that observed, survived, and interpreted those spaces. If consciousness is, at least partially, a distributed phenomenon, then the impressions left behind may be influencing perception today, creating subtle guidance or warnings encoded in the world around us. This idea aligns with the uncanny phenomena many people experience. Moments of déjà vu, sudden recognition, or inexplicable familiarity can be unsettling because they defy conventional explanation. Neuroscience often interprets these experiences as misfired memory or pattern recognition. Yet, if awareness can persist, these feelings may be echoes of ancestral cognition, a sense that a pattern, place, or choice has been encountered before, not by you personally, but by those whose consciousness remains imprinted in the flow of time. Such impressions are not literal memories, but subtle guidance appearing at the edges of perception, shaping thought and behavior without conscious recognition. Ritual, tradition, and storytelling may serve as interfaces for this persistent awareness. Throughout human history, ceremonies honoring ancestors, seasonal observances, and cultural rites have been central to community life. These practices are often dismissed as superstition or symbolic gestures, yet they may have a deeper function. By engaging in ritual, communities maintain connection with the past, focus collective attention, and reinforce inherited patterns of awareness. Stories particularly encode lessons, strategies, and values. If consciousness can persist, narratives become more than historical record. They act as conduits through which fragments of awareness continue to interact with the living, offering guidance, caution, or inspiration. Intuition and instinct may be the most immediate manifestations of this influence. Often described as a gut feeling or inner knowing, intuition bypasses deliberate reasoning yet can be remarkably accurate. Behavioral science attributes this to subconscious processing of environmental cues. Yet, when viewed through the lens of ancestral persistence, intuition could also reflect the integration of inherited awareness. Decisions informed by intuition are then not entirely private. They are shaped by layers of experience embedded in cognition over generations. What feels like sudden clarity may, in part, be the voice of those who came before, whispering through the structures of thought that bind past and present. Family dynamics provide another window into inherited consciousness. Patterns of behavior, conflict, and preference often recur across generations. Siblings, parents, and grandparents unconsciously transmit habits, beliefs, and emotional responses. While psychology typically frames this as modeling or conditioning, the consistency and subtlety of these patterns sometimes suggest something more profound. If consciousness persists, these recurring behaviors may represent the continuation of awareness, expressed indirectly through predispositions, emotional tendencies, and instinctive reactions. The family becomes not just a social unit, but a vessel through which ancestral cognition remains active. Cultural memory operates similarly, amplifying the reach of inherited awareness. Traditions, rituals, art, and language encode patterns of thought and emotion. These cultural forms survive long after individual creators have passed, influencing perception, decision-making, and emotional resonance. Artworks, for example, often evoke reactions that transcend personal experience, tapping into universal or historically embedded patterns. Music can move people across generations, evoking emotions they cannot fully explain. If consciousness can persist in subtle ways, these cultural artifacts may carry fragments of awareness, offering guidance, shaping emotion, and fostering connection with the minds that produced them. The persistence of awareness reframes moral and ethical intuition as well. Humans internalize norms, taboos, and values through family, community, and culture. Traditionally, these are understood as social conditioning or evolutionary adaptation. Yet, if consciousness endures, morality may be partly informed by the ongoing presence of ancestral awareness. Internalized guidance, ethical impulses, and instincts toward fairness or caution could be echoes of decisions and judgments from previous generations. Moral reasoning becomes a dialogue across time rather than a purely individual calculation, shaped by layers of experience and insight accumulated through the lineage of consciousness. Even modern life, often characterized as disconnected from history, may be influenced by this residual awareness. Urban landscapes, technology, and societal structures are built upon the decisions, experiences, and innovations of countless predecessors. Individuals navigate these environments daily, often unaware of the historical layers shaping perception and choice. If consciousness persists, these inherited patterns may guide adaptation, decision-making, and creativity. The living engage continuously with echoes of the past, negotiating challenges and opportunities with awareness that extends beyond personal experience. Dreams offer perhaps the most intimate space for interaction with inherited awareness. Dreams combine memory, imagination, emotion, and cognitive processing. They provide a stage where experiences can be recombined, analyzed, and rehearsed. If consciousness persists beyond death, dreams may become a medium for subtle guidance. Imagery, emotional resonance, and narrative structure in dreams could encode fragments of ancestral cognition, providing insights, warnings, or encouragement that feel personal, yet arise from a deeper temporal network. The subconscious may serve as the interface where these layers of awareness converge, shaping thought and emotion in ways that extend beyond individual experience. Many people experience internal conflicts that feel disproportionate to their circumstances. Guilt without a clear cause, grief without a clear loss, or responsibility that feels heavier than personal experience can justify. Psychology often explains this through family systems, attachment styles, or inherited trauma. Yet these explanations may only describe the mechanism, not the source. If awareness can persist, then some of these emotional weights may belong not entirely to the individual, but to unresolved experiences carried forward through generations. In this sense, personal struggle may sometimes be ancestral struggle, continuing its search for resolution. This reframes the idea of healing. Healing is usually understood as an individual process, a personal journey toward balance and understanding. But if inherited awareness exists, healing may ripple backward as well as forward. When someone confronts fear, resolves trauma, or changes a destructive pattern, they may not only be improving their own life, but altering the trajectory of inherited consciousness. The act of healing becomes a form of communication across generations, signaling that certain burdens no longer need to be carried. Change in one life subtly reshapes the network of awareness connected to it. This possibility might explain why personal breakthroughs often feel larger than personal. People describe moments of clarity or release that feel disproportionate to the immediate situation, as though something deeper has shifted. These moments are sometimes accompanied by dreams, emotional surges, or a sense of peace that feels ancient rather than newly formed. If consciousness persists, these experiences may represent adjustments within a larger system, where inherited patterns loosen their grip and allow new forms of expression to emerge. Creativity also takes on a new dimension through this lens. Artists, writers, musicians, and inventors often describe their work as something that flows through them rather than something they consciously produce. Inspiration arrives suddenly, fully formed, and resists direct control. Neuroscience attributes this to subconscious processing and pattern synthesis. Yet, if awareness can persist across generations, creativity might be a collaborative act between the living and the residual consciousness of the past. Artistic expression becomes a continuation of thought, emotion, and imagination that began long before the individual creator existed. Many creators report feeling compelled to express themes or stories that resonate deeply with cultural or familial history. These themes recur across generations, appearing in myths, art, and literature. The persistence of certain symbols, journeys, sacrifices, transformations, suggests an enduring structure of human experience. If ancestral awareness lingers, these recurring motifs may be more than universal psychology. They may be the imprint of long-standing consciousness seeking expression, using each new generation as a medium. Even innovation, which we tend to view as forward-looking, may be guided by inherited awareness. Technological and cultural advances often emerge when conditions align with long-standing needs or unresolved challenges. Inventions rarely appear in isolation. They are built upon layers of prior knowledge, experimentation, and intention. If consciousness persists, innovation may be partially guided by unresolved questions or ambitions of the past, finding expression when circumstances finally allow. Progress becomes not just linear advancement, but the unfolding of intentions seeded generations earlier. The idea of guidance becomes especially interesting when applied to moments of crisis. People often describe feeling unexpectedly calm or decisive during emergencies, acting with clarity they cannot replicate under normal conditions. This phenomenon is typically explained as adrenaline-driven focus or subconscious training. Yet, if inherited awareness exists, these moments may reflect the activation of ancestral experience, surfacing knowledge that once meant survival. In critical moments, the past may rise to the surface, guiding action when conscious deliberation would be too slow. This perspective also reframes fear. Some fears appear irrational, resistant to reason or reassurance. They persist despite evidence of safety, shaping behavior in subtle ways. While these fears can often be traced to upbringing or trauma, some seem older, deeper, and less personal. If ancestral consciousness persists, fear may function as a warning system inherited across generations, echoing dangers that once threatened survival. Even when those dangers no longer exist, the emotional imprint remains, guiding behavior through avoidance and caution. The persistence of awareness also invites reconsideration of free will. If choices are influenced by inherited patterns of thought and feeling, then autonomy is more complex than it appears. Free will may not be absolute independence, but the ability to recognize and negotiate influence. Awareness of inherited guidance allows individuals to engage consciously with it, choosing when to follow instinct and when to challenge it. Autonomy becomes a skill rather than a given, cultivated through reflection and understanding of one's internal landscape. Relationships, too, may be shaped by ancestral influence. People often find themselves drawn to certain types of partners or repeating relational dynamics without clear explanation. These patterns are frequently attributed to attachment styles or learned behavior. Yet, if awareness persists, relationships may also be influenced by inherited emotional frameworks, unresolved attachments, loyalties, or conflicts carried forward. Interpersonal attraction and tension could reflect not only personal psychology, but the continuation of relational patterns seeking resolution across time. This might explain why some relationships feel immediately significant, as though they carry weight beyond the present moment. Such connections can feel fated or inevitable, drawing people into intense emotional exchanges that defy rational explanation. If consciousness can persist, these encounters may represent intersections of inherited awareness, where patterns converge and seek expression or resolution. Relationships become meeting points not just of individuals, but of histories. Even solitude may be reinterpreted through this lens. Moments alone often bring unexpected thoughts, memories, or emotions to the surface. Silence seems to invite something to speak. While psychology explains this as the mind processing suppressed material, inherited awareness could also surface in these quiet moments, when the noise of daily life recedes. Reflection and stillness may open channels to deeper layers of cognition, where ancestral influence becomes more perceptible. This view also reshapes how we understand purpose. Purpose is often described as a personal calling, something discovered through introspection or experience. But if awareness persists, purpose may be partially inherited, a continuation of unfinished aims, values, or aspirations from those who came before. This does not diminish individuality, rather, it situates personal purpose within a broader narrative. A life's direction may feel meaningful because it resonates with patterns of intention that predate the individual. Finally, considering the persistence of ancestral awareness invites a shift in how we interpret personal responsibility. If struggles, fears, and inclinations are influenced by inherited consciousness, blame becomes less useful than understanding. Responsibility shifts from judgment to stewardship. Each individual becomes a caretaker of inherited awareness, capable of transforming, refining, or releasing patterns rather than simply repeating them. Living becomes an act of participation in an ongoing process, where consciousness is not owned, but carried forward, shaped by choice, reflection, and awareness. In this light, everyday life is more layered than it appears. Behind ordinary decisions and emotions lies a complex interplay of personal experience and inherited awareness, quietly shaping the direction of thought and action. The present moment is not just a point in time, but a convergence of lives, intentions, and experiences stretching far into the past, all subtly influencing what happens next. People often describe turning points that seem to arrive without warning, a realization that alters their priorities, a choice that reshapes their life, or a moment of clarity that dissolves long-held confusion. These experiences are usually framed as personal growth or insight. But if consciousness is layered across generations, such turning points may represent moments when inherited patterns realign. The past does not simply push forward. Sometimes it yields, allowing something new to emerge. Change, then, is not only personal evolution, but a shift in the balance between inherited influence and conscious choice. This perspective casts habit in a new light. Habits are often treated as individual behaviors reinforced through repetition. Yet many habits feel older than personal memory. Ways of responding to stress, relating to authority, or interpreting uncertainty often appear early in life, before conscious reasoning develops. If awareness persists, habits may be expressions of ancestral strategies, ways of coping that once worked well enough to survive. Over time, these strategies harden into automatic responses, even when circumstances change. Breaking a habit may therefore feel like defying something ancient, not just resisting convenience, but challenging an inherited mode of being. The persistence of awareness also reframes coincidence. People frequently encounter events that feel meaningfully connected. Chance meetings, unexpected opportunities, or repeated symbols appearing across time. While probability explains much of this, the emotional impact of coincidence often exceeds rational explanation. If ancestral consciousness remains active in subtle ways, coincidence might represent resonance rather than randomness. Moments when present circumstances align with inherited patterns of intention or awareness. Meaning arises not because events are orchestrated, but because layers of consciousness recognize familiar structures within unfolding reality. This idea becomes especially compelling when considering migration and place. Many people feel a deep connection to certain regions, cultures, or landscapes despite no conscious exposure. A sense of belonging may arise without clear cause, as though something recognizes the environment. While genetics and culture explain part of this, inherited awareness could add another dimension. If consciousness leaves impressions tied to place through repeated interaction, survival, and meaning, descendants may feel drawn to those locations, guided by echoes of familiarity that transcend personal memory. Language itself may carry traces of persistent awareness. Words shape thought, emotion, and perception, and languages evolve through countless speakers over time. Idioms, metaphors, and grammatical structures encode patterns of attention and value. When we speak, we are not simply expressing personal thought, we are channeling cognitive frameworks shaped by generations of speakers. If consciousness can persist, language becomes a medium through which ancestral awareness subtly influences how ideas are formed, framed, and understood. Thought itself becomes collaborative across time. This collaborative aspect of consciousness challenges the notion of originality. While individuals create new ideas, those ideas are always rooted in existing frameworks of thought. Innovation often emerges at the intersection of inherited knowledge and novel circumstance. If awareness persists, originality may involve reconfiguring ancestral cognition rather than generating something entirely new. Creativity becomes less about invention from nothing and more about transformation, reshaping what has been carried forward into forms that suit the present. The persistence of awareness also deepens our understanding of longing. Humans often feel drawn toward goals or experiences they cannot fully articulate. A desire to explore, to build, to teach, or to protect may arise without clear origin. These longings can feel deeply personal, yet strangely impersonal at the same time. If ancestral consciousness persists, longing may reflect inherited intention, a drive that once served survival or meaning, now expressed through new forms. Purpose becomes a resonance between past intention and present possibility. This view reshapes how we understand resilience. Some people endure extraordinary hardship with unexpected strength. While psychology attributes this to personality, upbringing, or coping mechanisms, inherited awareness could play a role. Resilience may be the activation of ancestral experience, strategies forged through repeated confrontation with adversity. In moments of crisis, the present self may draw upon a reservoir of inherited awareness, responding with calm, adaptability, or endurance that feels larger than personal experience alone. Even humour may carry traces of this persistence. Humour often relies on shared assumptions, cultural context, and timing. What one group finds amusing, another may not. These preferences are shaped by history, experience, and collective memory. If awareness persists, humour becomes a subtle expression of ancestral cognition. Patterns of perception and response passed forward, shaping how people find relief, connection, and meaning in shared laughter. Silence, too, becomes significant. In quiet moments, when external stimulation fades, internal dialogue often intensifies. Thoughts arise that feel unbidden, emotions surface without clear cause. While this is often explained as subconscious processing, inherited awareness may also become more perceptible in silence. Without constant distraction, subtle influences can emerge, presenting themselves as intuition, memory fragments, or emotional resonance. Stillness may not be empty, it may be crowded with echoes. This perspective invites a reconsideration of wisdom. Wisdom is often associated with age and experience, yet some individuals display insight far beyond their years. While intelligence and learning explain part of this, inherited awareness could contribute. Wisdom may not always be acquired within a single lifetime. It may be drawn from layers of experience accumulated across generations. When insight appears suddenly, it may feel less like learning and more like remembering. The idea of ancestral persistence also reframes regret. Regret is often understood as a response to personal mistakes, but some regrets feel vague, pervasive, or misaligned with personal history. If awareness persists, regret may sometimes reflect unresolved outcomes from the past, carried forward as a general sense of caution or longing for different possibilities. Addressing regret then becomes not only a personal task, but a form of reconciliation with inherited awareness. Finally, this framework transforms how we understand legacy. Legacy is usually thought of as what one leaves behind: achievements, memories, influence. But if consciousness persists, legacy is not merely external. It is internalized by future generations. Thoughts, emotions, and patterns of awareness may continue to shape lives long after the individual has passed. Living responsibly, then, involves not only immediate consequences, but the quality of awareness one contributes to the ongoing network of consciousness. Seen this way, existence is deeply interconnected across time. Each person is both recipient and contributor, influenced by inherited awareness and shaping what will be carried forward. The present moment becomes a meeting point where countless past lives converge, quietly informing choices, emotions, and perceptions, while simultaneously projecting influence into futures yet to unfold. Humans are meaning-making creatures. We instinctively search for patterns, narratives, and explanations that help us orient ourselves in the world. This drive is so fundamental that even random events are often woven into coherent stories. From a conventional perspective, this is a cognitive tendency shaped by evolution. But if ancestral consciousness lingers, meaning may not only be constructed, it may be remembered. Certain narratives resonate because they align with inherited frameworks of understanding, shaped by countless lives interpreting the same questions of survival, loss, love, and purpose. This may explain why certain stories feel timeless. Myths, legends, and archetypal narratives appear across cultures with striking similarity. The hero's journey, the fall and redemption, the wise elder, the trickster. These patterns recur with remarkable consistency. Psychology often attributes this to universal aspects of the human psyche. Yet, if consciousness persists, these stories may be expressions of long-standing awareness, carried forward and reshaped by each generation. They endure not only because they are useful, but because they are familiar to the deeper layers of cognition that remember what has worked before. The persistence of awareness also reframes curiosity. Curiosity often feels spontaneous, even irrational. People become fascinated by subjects or questions they cannot easily justify. A child may be drawn to history, astronomy, or philosophy without clear cause. While environment and exposure play a role, inherited awareness may also be at work. Curiosity could reflect unresolved inquiry, questions that remained unanswered in previous generations, now resurfacing in new minds with new tools. The drive to know becomes a continuation rather than a beginning. This idea also deepens our understanding of anxiety. Anxiety often arises in anticipation of threat, even when no immediate danger is present. It can feel like an alarm without a clear source. Psychology explains this as heightened sensitivity or miscalibrated stress response. But if ancestral awareness persists, anxiety may sometimes represent inherited vigilance, warning systems forged in environments far more dangerous than the present. The nervous system may be responding not to current reality, but to echoes of past conditions encoded within inherited awareness. Hope, by contrast, may be equally inherited. Just as fear can be passed forward, so can optimism, faith, and resilience. Families and cultures often transmit attitudes toward hardship, shaping whether adversity is met with despair or determination. If awareness persists, hope may be the echo of survival and success, evidence carried forward that endurance is possible. In this sense, hope is not naive. It is informed by accumulated experience that recognizes patterns of recovery and renewal across time. The persistence of consciousness also reshapes how we interpret coincidence between people. Some encounters feel immediately significant, as though they carry weight beyond the present moment. These connections can feel charged, purposeful, or strangely familiar. Psychology often frames this as projection or emotional resonance. Yet, if awareness persists, such encounters may represent intersections of inherited patterns, moments where lines of consciousness cross, recognizing shared structures or unresolved themes. Relationships then become not merely interpersonal, but intergenerational, shaped by histories that predate the individuals involved. This framework also offers a new way to understand loneliness. Loneliness is often described as a lack of connection, but it can persist even in the presence of others. If awareness is distributed across generations, loneliness may sometimes reflect a disconnection from inherited narratives or meaning structures. When individuals feel severed from family, culture, or history, they may also feel cut off from the deeper layers of consciousness that provide context and belonging. Reconnection, then, may involve not only social contact, but engagement with lineage, story, and shared memory. Silence between generations may be as influential as communication. Families often carry unspoken rules, taboos, and omissions. Certain topics are avoided, certain histories left unexamined. These silences shape behavior just as strongly as explicit instruction. If consciousness persists, unacknowledged experiences may continue to exert influence, surfacing as tension, confusion, or inexplicable emotion. What is not said may guide as powerfully as what is spoken, echoing through awareness until it is recognized. The persistence of awareness also reframes responsibility toward the future. If consciousness does not end with individual death, then present actions contribute to the quality of awareness inherited by future generations. Decisions, values, and emotional patterns become part of a collective reservoir. Responsibility extends beyond immediate consequence to long-term influence. Ethical living becomes not only about present relationships, but about shaping the internal landscapes of those who will come after. This view invites a different understanding of wisdom traditions. Teachings passed down through philosophy, religion, and culture often emphasize humility, patience, and awareness of impermanence. These lessons may not simply be moral prescriptions, they may be distilled guidance from accumulated consciousness. Traditions endure because they resonate with patterns of experience that persist across generations. Following them may feel grounding because they align with inherited structures of understanding. The persistence of ancestral awareness also alters how we perceive failure. Failure is often experienced as personal inadequacy. But if awareness persists, failure may sometimes represent the repetition of unresolved patterns rather than individual fault. Recognizing this can shift the response from self-blame to inquiry. What pattern is repeating? What lesson remains unintegrated? Failure becomes an invitation to break cycles rather than a verdict on worth. Even the experience of awe may be connected to inherited awareness. Awe often arises in response to vastness, nature, art, or ideas that exceed comprehension. It humbles and expands simultaneously. Psychology describes awe as a response to cognitive overload. But if consciousness persists, awe may reflect recognition of something deeply familiar yet larger than the self. It may be the feeling of alignment with a scale of awareness that transcends individual experience, reconnecting present consciousness with the accumulated perspective of generations. Moments of resistance become especially revealing. Resistance often shows up as avoidance, procrastination, or an inexplicable reluctance to act. We usually interpret it as fear, laziness, or self-sabotage. But resistance may also signal tension between inherited patterns and emerging awareness. A person may feel blocked not because they lack ability, but because a deeply embedded mode of thinking no longer fits the present. In this sense, resistance is not failure. It is friction between the past and what is trying to change. This friction often appears during periods of transition. Major life changes, leaving home, changing careers, ending relationships, can trigger disproportionate anxiety or hesitation. These moments threaten not just personal stability, but inherited structures of meaning. If awareness persists, transitions may unsettle ancestral patterns that relied on familiarity and repetition for survival. The discomfort is not merely individual uncertainty. It may reflect deeper layers of consciousness adjusting to new conditions. This perspective also reshapes how we understand guilt. Guilt often arises without clear wrongdoing, lingering even when rationally unjustified. While psychology connects guilt to social conditioning, inherited awareness may play a role. Guilt may reflect loyalty to ancestral norms or unspoken agreements carried forward. When an individual diverges from family or cultural expectations, inherited awareness may register the change as threat, producing guilt as a corrective signal. Recognizing this allows guilt to be examined rather than obeyed, transforming it from an unquestioned command into information about underlying patterns. Shame operates similarly, but at a deeper level. Shame attacks identity rather than behavior, creating a sense of inherent inadequacy. Families and cultures often transmit shame unconsciously, embedding it within emotional responses and self-concept. If awareness persists, shame may represent inherited judgment, unresolved across generations. Breaking cycles of shame can therefore feel unusually difficult, as though one is challenging not only personal beliefs, but the accumulated weight of ancestral evaluation. The persistence of awareness also reframes ambition. Ambition is commonly framed as personal drive or desire for achievement. Yet many people feel compelled toward goals they did not consciously choose. A drive to succeed, protect, accumulate, or prove oneself may reflect inherited survival strategies. In earlier generations, ambition may have been essential for security or status. If awareness persists, That drive can continue even when conditions change, shaping lives through urgency and restlessness that feels personal but may originate elsewhere. Conversely, contentment may also be inherited. Some individuals display a remarkable capacity for satisfaction, even under modest conditions. This may reflect inherited awareness shaped by survival in scarcity, where gratitude and acceptance were adaptive. Contentment then becomes not complacency, but a deep-seated orientation towards stability and sufficiency passed forward through consciousness. This framework offers a new way to interpret inner conflict. People often experience opposing impulses, one urging caution, another urging risk. These conflicts can feel like internal debates between different selves. If awareness persists, such conflicts may represent the coexistence of multiple inherited strategies. One impulse may originate from experiences of loss or danger, another from experiences of opportunity or growth. The mind becomes a meeting place where different ancestral perspectives negotiate response. Decision fatigue, too, may have roots beyond the individual. Modern life presents an overwhelming number of choices, many of which would not have existed for previous generations. Inherited awareness may struggle to adapt to this abundance, producing stress or indecision. What once required simple, decisive action now demands constant evaluation. The resulting fatigue may reflect a mismatch between inherited cognitive patterns and contemporary environments. The persistence of awareness also reshapes how we experience time pressure. Some people feel perpetually rushed, as though behind an invisible schedule. This urgency may not originate in present circumstances, but in inherited memory of scarcity, danger, or limited opportunity. When survival depended on timing, delay could be fatal. That sense of urgency may persist, even when the external threat has passed, shaping behavior through chronic tension. Rest, then, becomes more than recovery. It becomes resistance to inherited urgency. Choosing rest may feel uncomfortable or even wrong, because it contradicts ancestral patterns that equated rest with vulnerability. Learning to rest may involve renegotiating inherited awareness, signaling that the conditions requiring constant vigilance no longer apply. In this way, rest becomes a form of communication across generations, reshaping inherited patterns through lived example. The idea of persistent awareness also reframes compassion. Compassion is often understood as empathy for others' suffering. But if inherited awareness shapes behavior, compassion may also involve recognizing that actions often arise from layers of history rather than conscious choice alone. This recognition can soften judgment, both toward others and oneself. Understanding behavior as influenced by inherited consciousness allows for responses rooted in curiosity and care rather than blame. Forgiveness gains new meaning here as well. Forgiveness is often framed as releasing personal resentment, but if awareness persists, forgiveness may also involve releasing inherited grievances. Family and cultural conflicts can linger for generations, shaping identity and behavior long after the original events. Forgiveness may represent a break in this transmission, allowing awareness to move forward unburdened by unresolved conflict. Even the experience of feeling out of place may be connected to inherited awareness. Some people feel misaligned with their environment, culture, or expectations, as though they belong elsewhere or in another time. While this is often attributed to personality or circumstance, it may also reflect inherited patterns struggling to find resonance in current conditions. The sense of displacement may be a signal that existing structures no longer align with the awareness being carried forward. This perspective invites a different relationship with inner signals. Instead of treating emotions and impulses as purely personal or random, they can be approached as information emerging from a layered system. Each feeling carries a history, whether personal or inherited. Listening becomes an act of interpretation rather than obedience, allowing individuals to engage with inherited awareness consciously and selectively. If inherited awareness can guide, resist, and shape experience, then moments of clarity become especially significant. Clarity often arrives suddenly, cutting through confusion without effort. People describe it as seeing things clearly for the first time, even when no new information has appeared. From a conventional perspective, clarity emerges when subconscious processing reaches a conclusion. But if ancestral consciousness persists, clarity may also mark moments when inherited patterns finally align with present conditions. The past recognizes the present as safe enough, appropriate enough, or ready enough to move forward. This alignment may explain why some insights feel emotionally charged, accompanied by relief, grief, or gratitude. These reactions can exceed the scale of the immediate realization, suggesting something deeper has shifted. If awareness persists, clarity may represent resolution not only at the individual level, but within the inherited layers of consciousness. A long-carried pattern relaxes. A vigilance finally stands down. An expectation dissolves. The body responds as though a long-standing burden has been lifted. This view reframes personal growth as a collective event. Growth is often portrayed as self-improvement, yet many people find that genuine growth changes how they relate to family, culture, and history. Old conflicts lose their power. Reactions soften. Perspectives widen. If inherited awareness is involved, growth may represent an update to the internal system, a recalibration that influences how ancestral patterns are expressed going forward. One person's insight can subtly alter the way awareness is carried into the future. Memory plays a key role here. As individuals reinterpret their past, they often reshape how memories feel. Events that once caused pain may be integrated into a larger narrative, reducing emotional charge. If awareness persists, this reinterpretation may extend beyond personal memory, affecting inherited emotional tones as well. The act of reframing experience becomes a form of healing that echoes across generations, modifying how inherited awareness responds to similar situations. This may explain why certain breakthroughs feel permanent rather than temporary. Some changes seem to stick effortlessly, as though resistance has vanished. Inherited patterns that once enforced behavior may no longer activate. The system recognizes that the environment has changed. This recognition does not require conscious effort. It emerges as a shift in baseline perception. Life feels lighter not because effort has increased, but because inherited tension has decreased. The persistence of awareness also reframes acceptance. Acceptance is often misunderstood as resignation, but true acceptance involves recognizing reality without resistance. If inherited awareness persists, acceptance may signal that ancestral patterns have updated their expectations. A situation once perceived as threat or loss is now understood as neutral or even beneficial. The resulting peace feels deep because it resolves conflict across multiple layers of consciousness. Even grief can be seen differently through this lens. Grief is usually understood as a response to loss, but some grief feels ancient, disproportionate, or diffuse. If awareness persists, grief may sometimes reflect accumulated losses carried forward through generations. Moments of grief may open channels through which these layers surface, seeking acknowledgement. Processing grief then becomes not only personal mourning, but a collective act of remembrance and integration. The experience of meaning often deepens during these moments. People report feeling connected to something larger than themselves, even when the insight is simple. This sense of connection may reflect alignment with inherited awareness. When present experience resonates with accumulated patterns of understanding, meaning emerges naturally. Life feels coherent not because everything is known, but because the layers of consciousness agree, at least temporarily, on direction. This perspective also reframes the fear of change. Change often triggers anxiety because it threatens familiar patterns. If awareness persists, fear of change may represent inherited caution, evolved through environments where change was dangerous. Recognizing this can soften fear, allowing it to be interpreted as information rather than command. Change becomes a negotiation rather than a rebellion. balancing respect for inherited wisdom with responsiveness to present reality. The persistence of awareness further alters how we understand learning. Learning is not simply adding information, it is reorganizing understanding. Some lessons are difficult not because they are complex, but because they conflict with inherited patterns. When learning finally integrates, it can feel like recognition rather than acquisition. The mind says, of course, as though something long known has resurfaced. Learning becomes a process of alignment across layers of consciousness. Even the experience of boredom may hold meaning here. Boredom often arises when inherited patterns expect engagement that the present environment does not provide. It signals a mismatch between what awareness anticipates and what reality offers. Rather than being trivial, boredom may indicate the need for new forms of expression that better align inherited drives with current possibilities. It is not emptiness, but unmet resonance. This view also reframes confidence. Confidence is often mistaken for certainty or bravado. But true confidence feels calm and grounded. It may emerge when inherited awareness recognizes that present competence is sufficient. Confidence, then, is not self-assertion, but internal agreement. Multiple layers of consciousness align around a shared assessment. This is manageable. Action becomes easier because internal conflict has diminished. Even uncertainty may be experienced differently. Uncertainty is usually seen as lack of knowledge, but if awareness persists, uncertainty may sometimes reflect openness rather than ignorance. Inherited patterns release their hold, allowing present awareness to explore without predetermined expectation. Uncertainty becomes space rather than threat, creating room for adaptation and creativity. As we approach the edges of this idea, one theme repeats: alignment. When present awareness aligns with inherited patterns, life feels coherent, meaningful, and manageable. When misaligned, tension, resistance, and confusion arise. Growth, healing, and insight often involve renegotiating this relationship, updating inherited awareness to reflect current reality. In this sense, living well may not be about overpowering the past or blindly honoring it, but about listening carefully, understanding what was carried forward for good reason, and gently releasing what no longer serves. Each moment of clarity becomes a quiet agreement across time, allowing awareness to move forward with less friction and more coherence than before. It is not just a point between past and future, but a convergence. Every thought you have, every choice you make, may be shaped by forces that are not visible, not audible, and not fully knowable. This does not make life deterministic or scripted. It makes it layered. The present is where inherited awareness, personal experience, and future possibility briefly overlap, negotiate, and decide what comes next. This perspective reframes what it means to pay attention. Attention is usually treated as a cognitive skill: focus, awareness, mindfulness. But attention may also be relational. What you attend to determines which inherited patterns are activated and which remain quiet. When attention is scattered, old defaults may dominate. When attention is steady, there is room to notice subtle influences, question impulses, and choose responses rather than react automatically. Attention becomes the point of contact between personal agency and ancestral influence. This may explain why intentional practices, reflection, journaling, meditation, storytelling have appeared in nearly every culture. These practices slow perception and turn awareness inward. From a purely psychological view, they increase self-regulation. But if awareness persists, they may also create space for inherited patterns to surface clearly, rather than acting from the shadows. What emerges is not necessarily voices or visions, but clarity about why certain feelings, fears, or desires keep returning. Insight replaces confusion not by adding information, but by revealing structure. The idea of guidance shifts here. Guidance does not need to arrive as instruction. It may arrive as constraint, as attraction, as discomfort, or as ease. A path that feels repeatedly blocked may not be forbidden. It may be misaligned with inherited awareness that still perceives danger. A path that feels strangely smooth may resonate with accumulated experience that recognizes its viability. Neither signal is absolute. Both are negotiable. Guidance, in this sense, is conversation, not command. This also reframes mistakes. If awareness persists, mistakes are rarely isolated. Patterns repeat until they are understood. People often find themselves making the same mistake in different forms, wondering why insight alone doesn't prevent repetition. Insight may not be enough if inherited awareness has not updated its expectations. Change may require lived evidence, new experiences that demonstrate safety, possibility, or sufficiency. Once the inherited system recognizes the update, repetition often dissolves on its own. This sheds light on why change sometimes happens all at once. A person may struggle for years, then suddenly shift without apparent effort. From the outside, it looks miraculous. From within, it feels obvious in retrospect. If awareness persists, the system may have been gathering evidence quietly, waiting for a threshold. When the threshold is crossed, the update propagates through all layers at once. What once required effort now feels natural. The idea of ancestors guiding our lives becomes subtler here. Guidance may not come from distinct entities with intention. It may come from accumulated patterns of awareness that favor survival, continuity, and meaning. These patterns do not know the future, but they recognize structure. They respond to resonance. When present conditions resemble past conditions, inherited awareness activates familiar responses. When conditions are truly new, inherited awareness may hesitate, creating the sensation of uncertainty or fear. This uncertainty is not failure. It may be the most open state available. When inherited patterns do not dominate, present awareness has room to explore. Creativity, adaptability, and innovation often arise here. The past loosens its grip just enough to allow something unprecedented to emerge. In this way, progress is not rejection of ancestry, but collaboration with it, honoring what worked, releasing what no longer applies. This perspective also changes how we understand intuition versus reasoning. Reasoning analyzes the present with available information. Intuition synthesizes across time. It draws on patterns that were never consciously learned. Neither is superior. Reason without intuition can be brittle. Intuition without reasoning can be outdated. Together, they allow inherited awareness and present intelligence to work in balance. If this is true, then maturity may not be about independence from the past, but fluency with it. A mature mind can sense inherited signals without being ruled by them. It can feel fear without obeying it, honor tradition without repeating it, and carry memory without being trapped by it. Maturity becomes the art of translation, turning inherited awareness into present wisdom. This also reframes the idea of being guided. Guidance does not mean being controlled. It means being informed by a depth of experience larger than one lifetime. The danger is not guidance itself, but unconscious guidance. When influence is unseen, it feels like fate. When influence is recognized, it becomes choice. Awareness transforms inheritance from destiny into resource. Even the idea of ancestors becomes less literal and more intimate. Ancestors are not only people with names and faces. They are systems of perception, strategies of survival, ways of interpreting reality. You carry them every time you react before thinking, every time something feels right or wrong without explanation. They are not watching you. They are participating through you. And participation works both ways. Just as the past influences the present reshapes what will be carried forward. Every time you respond differently, reflect instead of react, rest instead of rush, speak instead of remain silent, you alter the pattern. You do not erase the past, you update it. The awareness that moves forward through you is not identical to what you inherited. It is refined. This reframes responsibility in a quiet but profound way. Responsibility is no longer just about personal outcomes. It is about the quality of awareness you embody. Fear carried unconsciously is passed forward unchanged. Fear met with understanding transforms before it moves on. The same is true of love, resilience, curiosity, and hope. What you integrate becomes lighter. What you avoid remains heavy. Seen this way, life is not a test or a performance. It is a process of refinement. Each generation inherits awareness shaped by conditions it did not choose, then lives long enough to modify it. Some changes are small, some are significant. None are meaningless. Even subtle shifts in how one person relates to fear, trust, or possibility can echo forward in ways that are never visible, but still real. This perspective does not require belief in spirits, souls, or metaphysical certainty. It only requires acknowledging that consciousness is not as isolated or self-contained as we once believed. It is shaped, layered, and extended across time. Whether we call this ancestral consciousness, inherited awareness, or distributed cognition, matters less than recognizing its influence. And perhaps the most unsettling idea is also the most grounding one. You are not alone inside your own mind, but you are not trapped either. You are accompanied by history, but you are also its editor. Every moment of awareness is a moment of authorship, where the past is invited to continue, but not unquestioned. So when you feel a pull you can't explain, a resistance that doesn't make sense, or a knowing that arrives without effort, you don't have to assume something supernatural or dismiss it as meaningless. You can simply notice it as part of a much larger conversation, one that has been unfolding quietly for a very long time. A conversation that did not begin with you and will not end with you, but that briefly, unmistakably passes through you, shaped by what you choose to hear, what you choose to question, and what you choose to carry forward.